that's shepherds. And then it transitions to the next point, which is the sword. And this one, I think, is particularly important because some have said, oh, this teaching on not using the sword, non-resistance, there was some ambiguity there, and there was lots of different approaches and opinions. But Schleitheim Confession is very straightforward on their teaching on the use of the sword. So talk me through that and its significance for us today.
Okay. Well, on the ambiguous side, we looked at Hoopmeyer, and Hoopmeyer did think there could be a time to pick up the sword. So that would be, he wasn't ambiguous, he was on the other side of the question.
Yeah.
And then there is a North Anabaptist confession from a place called Wismar, and there it's the document we have seems a little bit corrupted, but it does sound like that perhaps an Anabaptist Christian could be a watchman or defend a watchman on the walls, maybe. But it is ambiguous, and it's questionable whether we actually have the document the way they said it. The vast majority of early Anabaptists followed through on what Conrad Grebel wrote about, as far as we should be sheep, not people that pick up the sword, but we should be sheep in this world. And then Schleitheim picks that right up with this section on the sword. And one of the interesting things it does is it actually brings the arguments that the non-Anabaptists would have. And then he will give an answer. The answer is, and then it, I think, always refers back to Christ. Christ did this, or Christ said this.
Excellent.
So, like at one point, it says, should we defend the good? And one point it says, well, if there's a disagreement about, let's say, an inheritance, and it's pointed, they go right to Jesus said that's not for him to do, and we should follow him. So this sword thing comes out of everything before this, that we're called to something higher than what the churches, like the Protestant and Catholic churches, are saying. They're saying there is a time when you may have to fight and maybe kill someone. And the Anabaptists are saying, well, we want to follow Christ, we want to walk in the resurrection, and they give specifics about what their neighbors ask them and what Christ's answer would be.
That's good. And what I think is one of the most significant things with this is the way he sets up the two kingdoms, which has hardly I see articulated this well since the early church. In the early church, we get it very clearly said that it's very clearly stated that God did institute human government, and those are given to us from God. Romans 13 is there, and we cannot hide from Romans 13. It actually says, it even calls in Romans 13 that he is a minister of God and was not given the sword in vain. The deeper understanding of that, however, and in looking at the early church, is that same sword that the Apostle Paul was speaking of in Romans 13 cut Paul's head off. And so God uses these swords. He brings order into this world, but we are given a different calling in this world. And that you see in the early church explicitly stated. You see Justin talking to the emperors and with this kind of language. You see Origen actually talking about this. Tertullian certainly talks about this. It is early Christianity. When I started looking into non-resistance, maybe it was the same way for you, Brother Stephen, is that the pacifist kind of argument sometimes confused me, because I looked at the Old Testament and I believed all the Word of God was true. Like, I had to do something with the Old Testament, and I had to do something with the New Testament and these things. And the early church kind of helped me to bring in these two kingdoms. But then when I started to look into different expressions of people who believed in loving your enemies and that kind of a thing, it got confusing. But when I read this, it actually was like, thank you. He understands it in a patristic, a very early Christian way, and it's profound. And so I'll give it to you here from his quotes. I just think it's well done. The sword is ordained of God outside the perfection of Christ. It punishes and puts to death the wicked and guards and protects the good. In the law, the sword was ordained for the punishment of the wicked, for their death, and the same sword is now ordained to be used by the worldly magistrates. He recognizes that. In the perfection of Christ, however, only the ban is used, for a warning and for the excommunication of the one who has sinned, without putting the flesh to death. Simply the warning and the command to sin no more. And so, again, like you said, looking at the objections, now many who do not understand Christ's will for us will ask whether a Christian may and should use the sword. The answer is this, just like what you were saying. Christ teaches and commands us to learn of Him, for He is meek and lowly in heart. He Himself forbade the woman taken in adultery to be put to death, even though the law of His Father had commanded it. Christ wants to be Lord and King over all, without force. Therefore, He gave His followers the rule: love your enemies, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them that persecute you. His disciples must not engage in worldly strife. And so I just think that's so well put. Mm-hmm. And then when you get that, it brings the whole Bible together. You see, even in the way in the Old Testament, the way that God would use Nebuchadnezzar or the Assyrian armies, and He calls them things like my
rod of my wrath.
The rod of my wrath and my minister. And so when they use that kind of terminology, we see that God has always operated like this. And we get to the New Covenant, it's the same way. And so this I consider brilliant. And the way it's done is in retaining and bringing back this ancient early church understanding is I think is one of the more profound things in this statement.